A Chinese bride thought no one wanted her, until a little girl whispered, "Can you be my mommy forever?" Montana Territory, late autumn, 1883. The snow had begun to fall hours ago, thick and relentless, blanketing the train platform in a suffocating silence. The train whistle had long faded into the distance, ghosting through the white haze, but Mai Lin remained frozen in place. Her hands, red and trembling, clutched the handle of a worn carpet bag. She was dressed not for the biting Montana winter, but in the remnants of a life she had tried to leave behind, a tattered, traditional grey cheongsam that offered no defense against the wind. Dust and ice swirled at her boots as the last passengers disappeared down the path to town, welcomed by warm embraces and heavy coats. None had come for her. Again. Mai Lin sat down on a bench carved rough and cold, her spine rigid with the weight of humiliation. She pulled a letter from her sleeve, the paper creased soft at the edges, read too many times. She had memorized every line, every promise scribbled by the man who had signed his name as Preston Grady. "I have a quiet home, a warm hearth, and a place for a kind soul to belong," but no one came. There was no wagon, no invitation, only the howling silence of the frontier. From a distance, two young men leaned against a barrel, grinning behind their hands. One of them laughed aloud, his voice carrying over the wind. "There she is. The railroad girl. Thought she'd marry herself a rancher, did she?" Mai Lin flinched. It wasn't the first time. She had been turned away before. In the mining camps, in the crowded cities of the coast, the truth always rose like bile in their throats. Foreigner. Outsider. Even when she had tried to make an honest living washing clothes or mending silk, the whispers followed. Tears welled up, hot against the freezing wind. She lowered her head, shoulders curling in. She hadn't cried in front of anyone in years, but now she wept quietly, hopelessly, the letter crumpling in her lap. Small footsteps tapped closer, crunching softly in the snow. Then, a child's voice, bright and clear, pierced the gloom. "Are you hurt?" Mai Lin looked up. A girl no older than 3 stood before her, eyes wide with concern. She was a stark contrast to the grey world around them, wearing a light pink prairie dress layered under a heavy wool coat, with mittens that hung from a string around her neck. Golden curls peeked out from beneath a knit cap. Mai Lin wiped at her face with her sleeve, the silk damp and cold. "No. I'm just," she stopped, trying to force a smile for the child. "Just a little sad." The girl studied her seriously. "Did your daddy say no?" Mai Lin blinked, taken aback. "No, sweetheart." The girl tilted her head. "Do you have a husband?" Mai Lin shook her head. The girl tried again. "Do you have a baby?" Another small shake. Mai Lin managed to whisper, "Nobody wants me." The child stepped closer. Her mittened hand reached out, touching Mai Lin's freezing fingers with a certainty only a child could carry. She asked, "Can you be my mommy forever?" Mai Lin froze, her heart skipping a beat. Before she could answer, a soft, deep voice spoke from behind them. "Lily." Mai Lin looked up. A man had approached, quiet on his feet despite the heavy boots. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and older than her by a few years. His coat was patched, his hat worn from long rides, and he had the rough look of someone who had lived through too much and said too little. In one arm, he carried a small sack of supplies. His other hand rested lightly on the child's shoulder. He nodded toward Mai Lin, his eye scanning her thin dress with a frown. "Sorry. She's got a soft heart." Mai Lin stood quickly, brushing snow from her cheongsam. "No trouble. She just surprised me." The man's eyes lingered on the crumpled letter in Mai Lin's hand. "You waiting on someone?" Mai Lin hesitated, shame flushing her cheeks. "I was. But it seems I've been fooled again." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes without judgment. Lily tugged at his coat. "Papa," she cried softly. His jaw tensed. He looked back at Mai Lin. "You've got no place to stay." "No," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "But I'll manage." He stared a moment longer, looking at the grey silk shivering in the wind, then shifted the sack to his other hand. It's freezing, and that dress won't last an hour out here. If you want a roof and some warm broth, you're welcome to rest a while. Mylin blinked. I don't even know your name. Ethan, he said. Ethan Thorne, he gestured to the path. It's not far. You can leave after supper if you still want to. Mylin looked down at Lily, who still held her hand. Then she nodded. Thank you. And just like that, she followed the man and his daughter into the cold Montana dusk. Not with hope, but with the tiniest flicker of warmth, like a match lit in a blizzard. The path to Ethan Thorne's cabin wound through thin pine and broken hills. The sky had dimmed to a bruised violet by the time they reached it. Nestled in a hollow, the house was small, one room, a low porch, smoke curling from a narrow chimney. Lily pulled her hand gently. It's warm inside, she whispered. Ethan opened the door without a word. The fire was already crackling, casting long shadows on the rough plank walls. A single bed sat against the far corner. A small table, a rocking chair, sparse but clean. You can hang your coat there, Ethan said, gesturing to a hook by the door, then realizing she had no coat, he awkwardly cleared his throat. Or sit by the fire. Mylin hesitated. I won't stay long. Ethan didn't look up from where he removed his boots. That's up to you. But I didn't invite you here to stay forever. Just the night. Mylin's cheeks flushed. I appreciate your honesty. He moved to the hearth, stirring the stew pot. And for the record, I didn't write you any letters. Mylin blinked. You're not Preston Grady. Ethan huffed a dry sound, somewhere between a laugh and a grunt. Preston Grady is a 16-year-old boy who cleans stables in town. Likes to play matchmaker with strangers' mail. Likely thought it was a joke. Mylin stared at the floor, her hands clenched around the carpet bag strap. I see, she said quietly. The cruelty of it stung worse than the cold. Lily, sensing the tension, climbed onto the bench near the fire and patted the seat beside her. You can sit here, she said. It's warmest. Mylin Saturday. They ate in near silence. Ethan said little, Mylin said less. Only Lily, with her cheerful humming and slurping, seemed untouched by the awkwardness. After supper, Mylin stood. Thank you for the meal. I should go. But before she could reach the door, Lily slipped from her seat and latched onto the grey silk of her dress. No, the child cried. You said you didn't have a house. This is 1 inch. Mylin bent down gently. Sweetheart, this isn't my house. Lily's lip trembled. It can be. Just for a little. Mylin glanced at Ethan, unsure what to say. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. She gets attached fast, he muttered. I'll sleep in the barn, Mylin said. Or by the hearth, just for tonight. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. You can take the cot. I'll stay up. Mylin looked around, and that's when she saw it. In the corner, tucked behind a stack of folded blankets, hung a small dress, beaded, handmade, the kind worn by indigenous tribes of the plains. Beside it, a low wooden shelf held a few items, a feather, a string of turquoise, and a small pouch of dried sage. Mylin stepped closer. She was native, she asked softly. Ethan's voice came from behind her, guarded. Crow. Mylin turned. He didn't flinch. She died during the frost last year. Fever took her fast. Mylin's heart pulled tight. I'm sorry, she said. Ethan gave no reply, only added another log to the fire. Later, when Lily had drifted to sleep curled beside the dog, Mylin sat by the window with a blanket around her shoulders. Ethan spoke from across the room. You can stay just for a few days. She's calm when you're here. Mylin looked toward him. That's all right. I won't ask for more. He nodded once, then went back to his chair. Neither spoke again that night, but the fire burned low, and the cabin no longer felt like a place meant for one. It began with a shiver. Lily, who had danced barefoot in the cabin that morning, now lay curled on the cot, her skin flushed and damp. By nightfall, her breaths came in shallow gasps, her body trembling beneath the quilt. Ethan hovered beside her, eyes wide with panic. His hands, usually so steady with a hammer or rifle, now shook as he tried to press a wet cloth to her burning forehead. "She's burning up," he muttered. "I don't know what's wrong." My Lin had been sorting herbs she carried in her bag when she heard the strain in his voice. She stood quickly, crossing the room. "What happened?" "She was fine this morning," Ethan said. "Just a sniffle." Then she got quiet. Too quiet. My Lin placed her hand on Lily's cheek. The heat pulsed through the skin like fire under thin ice. "She has a fever," My Lin said calmly. "A bad one." Ethan's mouth tightened. "Can we take her to town?" "Not tonight. The storm is back, and she won't last the trip in the cold." Ethan stood, pacing. "I don't know what to do." My Lin touched his arm. "I do." He looked at her, surprised. "My father," she said, "worked on the railroads, but before that, he was a healer in Guangdong. He taught me things. Things that work when nothing else does." Ethan hesitated, looking at her foreign clothes, her foreign face. Then he looked at his daughter gasping for air. He nodded. "Do it." My Lin moved quickly. She reached into her satchel, pulling out dried roots, ginger, astragalus, and bundles of wrapped leaves. She boiled water, steeped the herbs, and crushed others into a thick paste. She worked without pause, without fear, her movement swift and sure. Ethan watched from the corner, arms crossed but tense. "She is just a child," My Lin murmured as she placed a warm herbal cloth on Lily's chest. "But she burns like she's carrying the world." "She's all I have," Ethan said hoarsely. My Lin did not answer, she kept working. She lifted Lily's head, coaxed her lips open, and dripped the bitter tea slowly past her tongue. The girl whimpered but swallowed. "She needs to sweat it out," My Lin said. "If she does, she'll break the fever before morning." The room settled into quiet, save for the crackle of fire and the occasional moan from the cot. Ethan sat on a stool, elbows on knees, eyes never leaving his daughter. "You've done this before?" he asked softly. My Lin nodded. "Many times. In the camps, doctors would not treat the Chinese workers. We had to save ourselves." Ethan's jaw twitched. "You sound more sure than most doctors I've met." "I had to be," she said simply. "Where I grew up, nobody came for us when we got sick." He studied her face, her calm, her certainty, the gentleness in her hands, and something inside him shifted. He was not used to this, being helped, being watched over. He had always been the one guarding the edges, shielding his family from pain. But tonight, it was My Lin who stood between death and his daughter. Sometime past midnight, the child stirred. Her cheeks were still flushed, but her breath no longer rasped. She opened her eyes. "Mommy," she whispered. My Lin froze. Ethan inhaled sharply. Lily reached out, fingers fumbling, until they found My Lin's hand. She gripped it tightly, then drifted back into sleep. My Lin looked at Ethan, lips parted. She doesn't understand," My Lin said quietly. Ethan's face was unreadable in the firelight, but his voice, when it came, was low. "She knows what feels safe." They sat in silence. Outside, frost clung to the windows. Inside, the girl slept, her hand in My Lin's. Ethan watched them both as if seeing a dream too fragile to speak aloud. He did not say thank you. But in the morning, when My Lin woke stiff by the hearth, she found a cup of coffee waiting on the table, fresh and poured just for her. The stars outside blinked cold and clear, scattered across the Montana sky like spilled salt. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. My Lin sat on the porch step, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, a mug of warm tea in her hands. The night was quiet. Lily had fallen asleep hours ago. Ethan stood at the far end of the porch, arms crossed, eyes trained on the tree line. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then My Lin broke the silence. "She asked me again tonight," she said. Ethan turned. "Lily?" My Lin nodded. "She wanted to know if I had a mommy. I told her I did once. A woman who sang to the silkworms and held my hand when the monsoon rains came." Ethan leaned against the railing. "She's gone. She died when I was very young," My Lin said softly. "My father brought me to America. He thought the Gold Mountain would give us a life." She sipped the tea. "He died laying track for the Central Pacific. The explosion took him, and the company took his wages." Ethan was quiet. "I was left alone at 12, she continued. "I learned to wash, to cook, to sew. But I never stopped being what they whispered. Foreigner. Yellow peril." She smiled faintly. "I tried to find work in the towns, but no one wants a Chinese girl unless it is for things I would not do." Ethan sat down on the other end of the step. "I filled out that form for the mail-order bride agency," My Lin said, her voice tightening. "It seemed foolish. But I thought maybe someone out there would see past the face, past the blood." Ethan looked at her, long and quiet. "I didn't write you," he said finally. My Lin gave a half smile. "I know." They sat in silence. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low. "I knew a man once who said blood tells the truth of a person." My Lin glanced sideways. "You believe that?" "I did," Ethan said. "Then I married a woman the town called a savage. My wife, Kaya. She was Crow. She had eyes that laughed at me even when her mouth didn't." He stared out into the darkness. "When I brought her back to town, they stared. Whispered that she'd put a spell on me. That our child wouldn't belong to God." My Lin felt her breath catch. "When winter came 3 years ago, I went out to find supplies," Ethan said, the weight of the memory pressing him down. "When I came back, the house was cold. Kaya was gone. Fever took her, but it was the isolation that killed her. No one would come to help a sick Indian woman." He looked at My Lin. "I buried her beneath the cedar tree. Told myself I'd raise Lily alone so no one could take anything else from me. I stopped choosing love. I chose survival." My Lin sat still, her hands clenched. "I understand," she whispered. "I didn't come here to fall in love either," My Lin said. "I just wanted a place where I wouldn't have to say sorry for existing." They looked at each other for a long moment. Nothing romantic passed between them, no brush of fingers, no sudden declarations, only the simple, raw understanding of two people who had survived being unwanted. "She would have liked you," Ethan said after a moment. My Lin smiled faintly. "She made a beautiful daughter." "She was the strongest woman I ever met," Ethan said. My Lin looked at the snow-covered ground. "Then I'll make sure her daughter grows up knowing that." Ethan stood, crossed toward the door, paused, and turned back. "You don't have to stay. I know that. But if you do, you won't owe me anything." "I'm not here to be owed," My Lin replied. "I'm just here." Another silence. But this one didn't ache. It settled around them like a blanket, warm with something like peace. The wind had shifted by mid-afternoon, becoming colder, sharper, with a whisper of fresh snow in its teeth. My Lin had just finished hanging a blanket to dry when she realized the yard was too quiet. "Lily?" No answer. My Lin dropped the blanket, eyes scanning the field. The gate near the tree line stood open. Panic clawed up her throat. She ran, her worn boots pounding across the frozen ground, calling the child's name. "Lily!" She found the little footprints by the stream first, then the pink ribbon from the dress snagged on a thorn bush. And then, a splash, a scream. "Help!" My Lin's heart stopped. Down by the edge of the creek, Lily flailed in the ice-cold water, swept by the current, her small hands grasping for a branch, slipping. "Hold on!" Mylin yelled, already tearing off her heavy borrowed coat, not thinking, only moving. The water was a blade of winter, it stabbed through her